Now, the rest of the story. You know how much we depend on domestically drilled petroleum. Imagine if something suddenly began fouling U.S. oil wells and ruining our domestic oil even before we could get it out of the ground. Well, many years ago, American wells in the East did fall victim to a plague of sorts, and many fortunes were lost. 15 years into the last century, the crude stuff was bringing about $12 a barrel, and then it happened. A well 2 miles south of Monticello, Kentucky, was rendered utterly worthless overnight. Newspapers reported the astonishing misfortune, although drillers in the area could not imagine the phenomenon recurring. 3 years later, the phenomenon recurred, and this time in McCreary County, partners in the drilling were 3 men, Beatty, Hewling, and Zimmerman. Angry, facing bankruptcy, these 3 grew determined that their enterprise would not be a total failure. So what they did was to analyze the subterranean junk that was rendering their crude oil worthless, and they discovered that there was a market for it. Beatty, Hewling, and Zimmerman learned that this destructive junk, we might as well call it that this junk which threatened to ruin them was an essential ingredient in many wonder drugs of that era. There were at least a half-dozen medicine manufacturers who would pay for this awful stuff. Now, so far, this was small scale, as it would continue to be for the next 25 years. It would take the promotional ingenuity of a man named Samuel Kyer to make the best of this bad situation. Sam was a successful Pennsylvania driller, as was his father before him. One by one, his wells were getting hit by the same plague which had been ruining Kentucky's crude for more than a quarter century. As an unhappy coincidence, Sam's wife became ill. The doctors feared tuberculosis, but the doctors prescribed a certain medicine for Sam's wife, and as Sam himself was administering that medicine in teaspoon doses, he began to suspect, at last fully realized, that the principal ingredient in that medicine was no more, no less than the junk that was putting their wells out of commission. Sam, while drilling for something valuable, had struck something perhaps more valuable: medicine. Sam was sitting on half a dozen medicine wells. Unlike those before him who had sold their refuse to medicine manufacturers hoping to break even, Sam Kyer had a large operation and an even larger imagination. He went into the medicine business for himself, claiming all manner of miracle cures in massive advertising campaigns, and an industry was born, although surely not any industry that you may have imagined. For in the early to middle years of the 19th century, the much drilled for $12 a barrel crude was crude brine. Brine from which the important food preservative salt could be derived through evaporation. And the miracle medicine that messed up salt wells all those years, the junk, the nuisance, the throwaway stuff, was petroleum. Oil, that is. Now you know the rest of the story.